Who is Spider-Man's best cinematic love interest? Part of the appeal of the relatability of Peter Parker is that among all of the school adversity, work issues, money troubles, and social problems, is that he consistently has to deal with a variety of women in his life that he always seems to ruin relationships with. Whether they never quite get together because of the pressure of their peers, or they break up because of the secrets kept between each other, or, the most down-to-earth examples, them being tossed off a bridge by a goblin man, or having your marriage with them sold to Satan. Okay, maybe not all of his girl problems are that relatable. At any rate, throughout his 7 live-action adventures on the silver screen, Peter Parker has romantic foils over all sorts of setting and times in his life, and today, we're going to definitively decide which one is the best. Well, you can disagree, and if you're immature enough, you're welcome to go throw a temper tantrum about a random guy's opinion in the comments section. We're going to look at a variety of factors, whether they have any chemistry with Peter, if they have an interesting backstory, their nature as an adaptation of previous sources, if their personality is something memorable, and seeing if they have a significant role in the plot. The first one we're going to look at is Mary Jane Watson, portrayed by Kirsten Dunst in the original Spider-Man trilogy. If you look around the internet, some people really hate her, with some calling her a genuinely terrible person or whatever.
Mary Jane Watson was an absolutely terrible person.
I really hate some of these
Raimi MJ was a terrible person.
Peter, but she's a slut and gave Mary the worst script.
However, I really disagree. This person has some flaws, definitely, but I would actually say that makes her more interesting, if anything. Many people say that Tobey and Kirsten have terrible chemistry, but I would actually say that it's pretty good. There's a believable awkwardness to their interactions, and showing Tobey's introverted Peter finding a way to connect with the more outgoing MJ is genuinely interesting to me. Mary Jane in the Raimi trilogy is sort of a unique case, as she isn't really the most faithful adaptation of MJ from the comics. In fact, I would argue the first film makes her more into an amalgam of several traits of Peter's girlfriends throughout the years, along with having ultimate influence as she is now Peter's longtime neighbor. But there's still enough to most strongly identify her as Mary Jane overall, especially in the later films. What's most interesting is that instead of showing MJ's spunky attitude front and center, the Raimi films are actually more interested in showing the woman behind the mask. You see a little bit of her vibrant personality, but the beauty of how MJ connects with Peter is comparing him to the abusive people who surround her. The awful way that her father treats her is directly on display in Spider-Man 1, and through it we can see what drives her. She wants to be an actress to get away from her awful home life, and the only person shown to legitimately encourage her is Peter.
I cried like a baby when you played Cinderella.
This connects them in such a genuine way in Spider-Man 1. Not to mention, their relationship features one of the most iconic kisses in cinematic history. People seem to hate on how angry she seems at Peter in Spider-Man 2, but to me, as much as it hurts to see him get spoken to like that, it's a believable human response. Look at it through her eyes. The only person who ever encouraged Mary Jane to achieve her dreams, the person who inspired her to be who she is right now, is never there for her anymore.
But my best friend, who cares so much about me, can't make an 8 o'clock curtain. After all these years, he's nothing to me but an empty seat.
Not only that, but after she tells him she loves him, after she finally connected, he turned her down and walked away. But that wasn't the end of it. Peter seems to want to be with Mary Jane from how he acts, but he refuses to say anything.
I've been reading poetry lately.
Whatever that means.
How would you react to such an indecisive person who can't give you an answer? Wouldn't you try to give up on him by moving on to an astronaut or something? Neither of these are terrible people. They're flawed human beings reacting to emotional turmoil like flawed real people would, who need to communicate with each other without secrets. That's why this is such a powerful moment. The second she sees him without a mask, she understands everything. But even when he explains why he has to let her go, even though he does love her, with all the danger their future together would face, she finally makes a stand in their relationship. She thought the man who encouraged her was gone, but he never was. He just had responsibilities to attend to. But now that she understands what those responsibilities are, she's willing to risk it, just to be with him. And I don't care what anyone says. That's a great romance. So why haven't I already ended the video because we already came to an obvious answer who the best was? Well, because Spider-Man 3 exists. I do like this movie, But one of its worst crimes was messing up the great romantic arc that Peter and MJ had been through together in the past 2 movies. It reduces Peter from a mature man to a self-centered boy and makes Mary Jane very unlikable. For some reason, the filmmakers just weren't interested in portraying Peter and MJ in an active relationship, and they just dragged out drama by making them split up. The flaws of Spider-Man 3 have been put on display for years, so I don't think I need to go into it with too much detail. But the one positive is that as silly and cringy as they act, there's still a little amount of tangible human authenticity to it all. And this quiet scene of them getting back together at the end with a slow dance is genuinely touching. Another problem with Mary Jane is she constantly is dragged into the damsel in distress role over and over again. It made sense in the first film to establish her relationship with Peter's alter ego, and in Spider-Man 2 she needs to be present during the finale for the truth to be revealed, but having it again in 3 really made it all add up. Mary Jane's purpose in the plot is incredible in many places in this trilogy, but character-wise there are a few holes. She's missing a certain sense of individuality to really make her great. At least her next contestant has that. Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy is a choice many people seem to love, and it's very understandable. In a way, she's everything that Mary Jane wasn't. She's smart and independent and actually helps out with the plot conflicts. Her chemistry with Andrew Garfield has consistently been one of the most memorable aspects of the Amazing Spider-Man duology. Sometimes you don't feel like questioning aspects of their relationship because of how believably they're bouncing off of each other. And it's honestly really well done. I can buy how these characters become attached to each other. It's actually pretty interesting how he reveals his identity right away. True, it kind of sucks the secrets and potential for drama out of the relationship, but at the same time we get to see her support and actively help Peter's endeavors as Spider-Man, feeling like a more active player in the story this way. Though yeah, the stalkerish stuff he exhibits at times is pretty weird. Webb's backstory and relationship to the comics is a little bit more interesting in here. In the original 616's comics, Gwen was not a character. To quote Gary Conway, who killed her off, she was blonde, beautiful, and boring. I mean, she's a sweet, nice girl and everything, but there's just not much there. In the Ultimate comics, they actually tried to give Gwen identity by making her more of a punk type. In the Amazing series, they don't really do either, as Gwen just more or less comes off as smart and feisty scientist girl. It's weird how they gave her a mother and brothers, because the one interesting aspect of Gwen in the comics was that she and her father were alone, as her mother had left her in the Ultimate version and died in 616, and that left her with some pretty interesting issues to explore, especially in the Ultimate comics. As a result, there's nothing particularly interesting about the backstory of this version of Gwen. Without the absence of her mom, there's no tension or tragedy shared between her and her father, and everything is left feeling kind of flat. If Mary Jane could be called too flawed, then Amazing Spider-Man Gwen has the opposite problem, with her becoming a scientific genius on a level above Peter Parker and no clear or identifiable human issues. She's almost deified as this perfect match for Peter Parker, and Captain Stacy dying and his guilt over his final promise with him seems to be the only thing getting in the way of their relationship. Indecision over Peter Parker's love life makes a comeback, only this time I would argue it's done significantly worse without any hint of thematic consistency, as Amazing Spider-Man 2 just features them constantly going back and forth thanks to him being haunted by Ghost Dad. Seriously, Peter was fine with them dating up until high school ended, but why are they just randomly breaking up at this point? True, I see the appeal of what High Top Films said in his Amazing Spider-Man essay. Them staying together is a flawed human choice, and that's something I've been encouraging throughout this video. But the sequel just turns into agonizing indecisiveness, and not knowing what to do is the primary driving force of their relationship in the sequel. And that's what I would call the difference between Peter and MJ and Peter and Gwen. One is about two people with stuff to work out, and the other is shown as this perfect, God-given relationship with the only thing keeping it apart is inconsistent guilt, which honestly takes away from my investment in it. It's sort of sad that Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the only Spider-Man adaptation to ever bother killing Gwen, mainly because this was a relationship with a lot of potential, and it was just completely ruined with the sequel's horrifically jumbled plot. The acting alone shows how awesome these two could have been if her death was actually earned instead of rushed and thrown in randomly because the comics did it. Liz isn't really a character. That's no particular offense to Laura Harrier, who is a good actress, but Homecoming portrays her mostly as a shallow high school crush, and in terms of realism, yeah, most high school relationships don't really have much to them. But that's still a problem in terms of my investment, because there's nothing really to or beyond what the plot itself offers. there's not much interaction between them. Even more, there's no conflict between the two as characters in terms of getting together. Peter constantly ditching his friends at the decathlon has no impact on how she treats him, and she just blandly accepts him asking her to homecoming. The main interesting thing in play here is, of course, her dad being the Vulture, which, yeah, that adds some awesome tension into the entire sequence from where Peter arrives at her house for homecoming all the way through the car ride. It improves her role in the plot significantly because Michael Keaton makes everything better. This gives legitimate stakes and choice to the finale of the movie. But sadly, it still doesn't really do anything for her character. The big thing that loses any interest for me with her is the last scene she shares with Peter. If she got legitimately mad at him for ditching her or had any sort of interesting reaction that left an impression, she could be memorable. But sadly, she doesn't say a thing beyond,
"Whatever's going on with you, I hope you figure it out."
There's not even really much that makes her Liz from the comics beside her first name and being related to a villain. And it's the wrong villain. So yeah, I don't really have much to say about her because the movie itself doesn't have much to say about her. But you know, shallow first crushes, I guess there's a way you can argue around it. Oh boy, it's time for this one. Okay, first things first, I am throwing out the adaptation comparison part I did with the others, because this character is not based on anything from the Spider-Man comics. I know some people are trying to spread a narrative that Zendaya was originally just going to play Mary Jane and they changed the name last minute because racists complained, like Mr. TikTok man right here is blithering about.
They changed Mary Jane's name because of racism.
But anyone who's saying this is pretty ignorant. If you know anything about Mary Jane Watson aside from her red hair, you'll be able to see that Michelle Jones is an entirely different character. She basically has the exact opposite personality of Mary Jane from the source material in any adaptation since. Mary Jane in the comics is a feisty party girl with a pained, abusive past, and Michelle Jones is a human personification of the sound effect. There's vague references to Michelle having a possibly tumultuous family life, but they never come into the story in any significant way, so I'm not counting them. I would be A-okay with Zendaya playing Mary Jane Watson. That would be awesome. She is a great actress who has shown she could do so much with the role of the character. But the fact of the matter, she is not playing Mary Jane. She is Michelle Jones, who is a completely original character. End of story. And from a base level, I'm fine with that. Wait, I guess that was technically an adaptation comparison. Whatever. When we're introduced to Michelle in Homecoming, all we get is a snarky Debbie Downer type person who randomly says, "Call me MJ" at the end. I guess they were laying the groundwork for her to become a fully fledged character in the sequel.
You serious?
Michelle is only more of a character than Liz purely based on her whole "I like terrible things and tragedy" shtick, which feels like a generic teen attribute, the edgy girl or whatever. Okay, sure. But why does Peter Parker suddenly decide he's super into her at the beginning of Far From Home? He just seems vaguely annoyed by her in the first film, so this turnaround makes no sense at all. The relationship has no more depth than Peter and Liz in Homecoming. At least that relationship had the vague excuse of shallow first high school crush, but by this point, Peter's relationship should have matured at least a little. You get our sense of adversity towards them coming together in the character of Brad, but he's not really there for any legitimate conflict, only to make Peter think he has competition. And so we can have the cringy bus sequence. And of course she finds his identity out right away, so there's no conflict in that area either. At the end of the day, this character is just a big waste of potential without any particular level of depth. And sure, maybe it's a cute little high school romance. Tom and Zendaya have okay chemistry. You can get wholesome little jitters out of them pecking on each other. And if that's all you're looking for, you know what? Good for you. But I'm the asshole who actually wants to ask for more. I want something that makes me actually feel emotion instead of just staring at the screen with a blank face, looking like I'm about to go comatose. Before I make my final choice, I guess I could mention Into the Spider-Verse, but in my opinion, though well done, Mary Jane in that movie isn't major enough to really be a part of this conversation. She's a great guiding force for Peter B, but as a character she only has a few lines, so there's not that much to analyze. And I'm not even really focusing on Miles, so his little thing with Gwen in that movie doesn't count. Okay, out of these romantic interests, who really is the best in terms of what's important? Well, in my opinion, and you probably already know my answer if you are paying attention, it's Mary Jane in the Raimi trilogy. Of all of these, she has the benefit of the most screen time, and she feels the most like an actual character, despite all the flaws in her writing, particularly in the third movie. The way she fulfills essential to the plot of those first two movies is so well done. Honestly, I would argue that Spider-Man love interests have gotten worse. So if you want to know my ranking, it's in the order they were introduced chronologically. Now, I know the insane Zendaya stans are going to come after me with chainsaws and revenge for what I said, so if you excuse me, I'm going to go work on my next video in a maximum security vault. What's my next video? Well, thankfully it has nothing to do with superheroes for once. Unless you count bending as a superpower. At any rate, thank you so much for watching. Please give this a share and like if you enjoyed it. And if you didn't, feel free to call me a biased cock-gobbling dodo in the comments section. I'm sure to take it to heart. Most of all, please subscribe if you feel sufficiently inclined.